Back in 2015, I was out on the road promoting Montage of Heck, the Kurt Cobain documentary, when I received a call from National Geographic asking if I would be interested in doing a film about Jane Goodall. I knew next to nothing about Jane. My knee-jerk reaction was, haven't there been a bunch of films about her already? And wow, that's weird that you saw the Kurt Cobain film and thought to hire that guy to do a Jane Goodall film. That's like a strange proposition. And then they sent me, they told me they had recently unearthed 150 hours of footage that had been, nobody had seen in eons. And they sent me an hour sample of it. And the second I saw the footage, I couldn't believe my good fortune. I thought then, and I say this now, that the footage that Hugo shot in Gombe in 1962, for me, is one of the most important and historical depositories of 16mm film of the 20th century. And I say that for two reasons, both for scientific and for filmic purposes. Scientifically, what Hugo documented was something that had never happened in the history of civilization and would never happen again. It was a once in eternity moment when a human being would cohabitate with wild chimpanzees. Now, we know now, after Jane's research, that one cannot touch chimpanzees, but we did not know that then. So back then, anything goes. So by the time she'd achieved her first big success, she had already herself implemented new rules saying you can never do this again. So what Hugo documented was something that had never happened in the history of this planet. Cinematically, to be able to document chimpanzees in a jungle, in a dark jungle canopy, on 16mm as a one-person film crew in 1962, if you understand how difficult it is to get an exposure on 60mm in a dark situation, shooting a dark subject, it was next to impossible for him to even get an exposure on a chimp in that jungle. For him to do all of that by himself is a feat that I can't begin to comprehend. I screened every frame of footage that Hugo shot in Gombe. The only shots that were not perfectly exposed and perfectly in focus we used in the film. I would have loved to have had a couple hours of outtakes of out of focus blurry shots because it would have helped me create a more immediate immersive experience. But the fact is, this man who's 24 had never shot a film in his life. I mean, shot one thing, but this is like his first big assignment. Walks into that jungle and comes out with this amazing document.
Yeah, what was it like reviewing that footage when you got the chance to review all of it? What was the most striking thing to you about viewing that lost footage?
Well, someone asked me earlier today what the most difficult film I've ever made, and it's without question Jane. I can't answer the question you just asked me because we weren't able to screen dailies in a traditional sense. The footage that was presented to us were a series of random shots. Back in 1965, when they were cleaning up the edit room for the television documentary Miss Goodall and the Chimpanzees, someone just took out and just put them on whatever random reel they could find. And so we never had, when we went to screen the footage, Joe Beshenkovsky and myself, a couple years ago, we'd go to put on what was labeled as reel one, and it would be, the first shot was like a chimp, the second shot was like Jane walking left to right across the screen, the third shot would be a landscape shot, the fourth shot would be a chimp. I mean, it was just completely random. And I said, this must be a selects reel. Let's go to another reel. And lo and behold, the entire film existed that way. So we didn't have an opportunity to screen dailies per se.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, I don't think Joe and I had any fun assembling this film. And none of the footage had sound. And, Hugo, even though we only focus on 5 chimpanzees in our film, Hugo filmed 160 of them. And it's not like they were wearing name tags. So we had to somehow figure out how to identify every chimpanzee from every shot that Hugo filmed in Gombe. First, identify whether they were our chimps or other chimps. And I mean, my facial recognition is terrible. So you can imagine how stressful that is. And then just not being able to screen, like it's so important for me as a documentarian. When the first thing I do when I start a film is I collect all the media on a subject and then I screen it chronologically because I want to see what sort of narrative naturally unfolds. And that's how I've made every film up to now. And that was taken away from us on this film. So what we had to do was, Jane wrote this book, In the Shadow of Man. And I basically went to the book after we screened through the material, put together a script, and then we set about visualizing the script with these random shots.
How long did it take?
There's not a moment in Jane. There's not a scene in Jane that actually was shot concurrently. Any moment in Jane probably exists of footage shot over the course of 5 years. So if she's meeting David Greybeard for the first time, that is probably a shot. There's a great scene that Joe put together where Jane follows David into the jungle. And it literally looks like it was storyboarded by Disney because David exits screen left, Jane enters screen right into the same frames. When Joe presented that to me, I said to him, I don't even know how you had the recall to put this together, but every shot in that sequence is shot at a different moment in time. But it looks like it was a storyboarded sequence. It was really, really remarkable. I really hats off to Joe on his first pass through this film. It's incredible.
How long did it take to complete the movie?
It was like 2.5 years. Joe was on for about a year, and then he left before Philip started scoring the film. And then Philip was on much longer than he anticipated. Philip was on for about 6 months. And then while Philip was on, I had to go back and recut all the film to Philip's music. And so in that sense, we were cutting up until, I would say I was still cutting 2 years after Joe and I started screening.
And I'm curious, what was Jane Goodall's, what was her involvement like? And I'm also curious of what do you personally feel is the most captivating thing about Dr. Goodall?
Well, Jane wanted no involvement with the film whatsoever. When she was approached by National Geographic, Jane was not a Montage of Heck fan. You know what I mean? She had no idea who I was. So all she knows is Nat Geo is doing another documentary. And in Jane's mind, it's like, oh my God, another one? How many of these are you guys going to do? So Jane, when her team said, I think the team at Jane Goodall Institute was like, Jane, this could be really good for us. You should do this. And she was like, all right, I'll do an hour interview. And, we needed, a couple days. And so that was a fight. She didn't want to give up anything. And however, when she saw the film, that all changed. She loved, very publicly has embraced the movie in a really wonderful way. But initially, she wanted nothing to do with it.
And what personally do you find to be the most captivating thing about Dr. Goodall?
I've never met anyone more comfortable in their own skin than Jane. She's the least pretentious human being I've encountered on this journey. She is so committed to making this world a better place for us, not for her. And I think that's why she has a almost saint-like quality to her. It's that selflessness and that determination. And you get a sense when you're around her. Like right now, Charles, as you and I are talking, Jane, I guarantee you, is somewhere around the world as we speak, making the world a better place for us. And I can't say that about it. I don't know what anybody else is doing, but I know that's what Jane is doing. And I have the world's greatest respect for her tenacity, her intelligence, her sensitivity. She's just a remarkable woman.
Were you prepared for that when you met her?
No, my deep admiration of Jane my deep admiration of Jane, this may sound awful, but probably has grown exponentially since we finished the film. Because I've got to spend all this time with her. You know, Jane and I got to travel the sort of globe together for 4 months, and that was amazing. I mean, incredible. Because part of that, I just did the interview with her. I didn't really get to know her that well. I'm in awe of her. And I'm glad I wasn't in awe when I was making the film.
So, as I said, your film...
And I think that's the film's success, Charles, because I think that the fact is, Jane wasn't in awe of me, and I was not in awe of Jane when we were doing the interview. And so there's a certain, I think, an honest discourse that took place where nobody's selling anybody, nobody's sort of... I didn't feel that there was a question I could ask her. She didn't feel that, I don't know, it's just very organic. You often don't get that when you're doing like these kind of epic biopics on people. Generally, people have an agenda and they're there to sell you something, some mythical narrative that they want to present. But it wasn't the case for Jane.
So, as I said earlier, the Jane has been recognized at this year's Emmys. It's received 7 nominations. Including the category, and I love the category title, Exceptional Merit in Documentary Filmmaking. What was it like finding out about the success that Jane has had at the Emmys? What was that like?
I will say that in years past, I've been sort of made a point to be awake when the nominations came out, and you know, I was really excited. I have to say, this year I really was not expecting anything other than perhaps Philip Glass. The one nomination we didn't end up receiving was the only one that I sort of figured we would get. So I was like in the shower, and when the nominations came out, and it was really, I started getting these texts. Yeah, it was. Listen, it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling to be recognized by your peers, particularly in the craft categories. That's where, you know, I'm a director who lives in the edit room. So my films are, you know, my sound team, when Nachio said to me, when we started a while ago, like, if there was one award that you would like to see this film secure, I was like, sound. I was like, our sound team deserves recognition. They created one of the most elaborate nature film soundtracks I've ever heard. You know, 2 years of sound editing, creating that thing from scratch using 50 years of field recordings. That sound team did just extraordinary work beyond my wildest dreams. So I'm so thrilled for everybody, really. I mean, it's a wonderful testament to the staff we had assembled for this film.
And to give credit to your sound team, you know, as you said, the 16mm film has no sound to it. So that you created this film, you know, and gave it an amazing, you know, sound and audio experience to it is really quite phenomenal.
You know, listen, one of the things, Charles, I started off making cinema verite films. My first documentary, On the Ropes, which came out in '99, I learned a really valuable lesson on that film, which is when you're making a documentary, you may not have the same resources in production that a fiction film has. Meaning, when I shot On the Ropes, I was the camera operator, my then girlfriend, Annette Burstein, was my co-director and co-producer, and she was doing sound. It was like the two of us. And so, you know, we couldn't afford fancy lights or anything like that. But what I realize is when you finish shooting and you get to post, we're in a level playing field with fiction. And that you can sound design a documentary with the same integrity that a fiction film is sound designed. And in fact, I would argue that viewers, our cinematic vocabulary is defined by dominant cinema, by narrative film. And so that viewers go into a documentary sort of anticipating or expecting to hear that full body experience. But what I'm saying is that, you know, to edit a fiction film, it's generally, you know, a couple people sound editing. And that same thing you have on a documentary. So you have the same tools, you're using Pro Tools, you have the same Foley artists and everything. So when I got to Jane, I knew from the second the project landed in my lap that sound would be our most useful tool in creating an immersive experience for the viewer. And that it was sound when Hugo and Jane initially shot this film in 1962. And when the film initially aired as a television documentary, they were using 60 millimeter optical tracks. So they had like one channel of sound that's paper thin. And I was like, we now have the technology to create an experience that you couldn't create in 1965. The same way with the color grading. You couldn't achieve the look of Jane in 1965. It was physically impossible. You couldn't do power windows in a telecine. And so when Jane saw the film for the first time and she said, this film, more than anything else that's ever been documented about me, captures my experience. I had this wonderful conversation with her. I said, you know, Jane, a lot of that has to do with the technology. That what you experienced in Gombe had its filmic limitations until recently in terms of what one in documentary could do with audio and what one can do with color grading. And, you know, like the color grading on Jane, we did 250 hours. And the raw footage isn't that, it looks nothing like what it looks today. It's not, there's no color saturation. It's all pretty much washed out in brown or green. There's two colors, brown and green. When Jane went to Gombe for the first time, she saw a world of color. That's how she experienced it. And so we wanted the viewer to be able to experience it the way she did.
So just one last question here. Jane was eligible at this past year's Oscars, did not get in. Did getting in at the Emmys feel sort of vindicating after being passed over at the Oscars?
No, not at all. I think that we had, you know, again, going back to the craftsfolk on this film, Jane won every Guild Award this year except for the DJ, which was something that I am so immensely proud of because of the recognition from the peers, for the sound editors and from the sound mixers and from the writers and the editors. So we never felt passed over or ignored in the Oscar thing. So I didn't feel that there was any, it didn't feel like that you know, there was some sort of redemption or anything like that. I'm thrilled that we were that our peers recognized the film. I'm thrilled that Jane herself will have, you know, more people hopefully get to experience the film now, which is why we made the film. And I think that it's wonderful. I think that Jane is a very topical film for this moment in time. When we premiered the movie back at Toronto, it was on the eve of the Weinstein scandal, the Me Too movement. And I can't think of a better antidote than Jane. So I feel like it's a wonderful culmination. And lastly, let me just say this. Jane began its journey in 1960, really, or 1962 when production began. National Geographic, the same channel that distributed our movie in 2017, 2018, not only financed that initial film shoot, they financed her research. So National Geographic is the reason Jane's study is even in existence. Now, whatever you feel about HBO and Netflix and these other various networks, what other network? Like, when has this ever happened? And where, so you know, it's something like this. It's phenomenal. So I'm probably more pleased that National Geographic has received this recognition, which I feel they so deserve for not just supporting Jane's research cinematically, but for being there at the very beginning when nobody else would finance a woman, a young woman who had never gone to college doing this study. They were the only ones in the world who would finance it.
That's unbelievable. That's absolutely unbelievable. Well, Brett, thank you so much for talking with us. We wish you all the best this Emmy season.
Thanks so much, Charles.